Before you skip this message, before you scroll to something else, before your mind tells you this is just another video that does not apply to you, listen carefully, because this moment is not random and this message is not accidental, and the battle you have been feeling lately is not something you imagined, and it is not something you created, and it is definitely not something you are fighting alone, because right now, even though you cannot see it, and even though you cannot explain it, and even though nothing around you seems to be changing, God is already fighting a battle on your behalf that your eyes cannot detect and your mind cannot understand and your enemies cannot stop, because there are moments in life when everything becomes strangely heavy and confusing at the same time, when doors close without warning, when people change without explanation, when opportunities disappear without reason, when strength fades without logic, and when hope begins to feel distant and silent, and in those moments it becomes easy to believe that nothing is happening and that God has stepped back and that maybe heaven has gone quiet. But the truth is, heaven never goes quiet when your destiny is under attack, and God never steps back when your future is being prepared, because the most intense battles God fights for you are the battles you never witness with your physical eyes, and the victories that change your life forever often begin in invisible places long before they appear in visible form. And right now, while you are questioning what is happening around you, God is already moving pieces you did not even know existed, and He is removing obstacles you never noticed were blocking your path, and He is silencing voices that tried to speak against your future, and He is strengthening you in ways you cannot measure yet, because sometimes protection does not feel like protection, sometimes protection feels like delay, sometimes protection feels like rejection, sometimes protection feels like isolation, sometimes protection feels like confusion, and sometimes protection feels like losing something you thought you needed, but what you thought was loss was actually God stepping into a fight that you were never meant to fight by yourself, and what you thought was silence was actually strategy, and what you thought was delay was actually positioning, because when God fights for you, He does not always announce it, He does not always explain it, and He does not always show you every move He is making, but that does not mean He is not working, because even right now, while you are wondering why certain things have not changed yet, God is already changing things behind the scenes, and He is already rearranging circumstances, and He is already protecting your name in rooms you have never entered, and He is already preparing answers to prayers you thought were still waiting. And there are people who tried to block your progress who have no idea why their plans suddenly stopped working, and there are situations that looked impossible that are already shifting quietly in your favor, and there are moments coming into your future that will make you look back at this season and realize that what felt like a battle you were losing was actually a battle God was winning for you the entire time, because there are fights that are too complex for human strength, and there are attacks that are too hidden for human awareness, and there are dangers that are too deep for human understanding, which is exactly why God steps in before you even know what is happening, and begins fighting battles you cannot see against enemies you cannot identify, through strategies you cannot imagine, because your destiny matters too much for God to leave it unprotected, and your calling matters too much for heaven to stay silent, and your future matters too much for darkness to win. And even though today may feel uncertain, and even though your situation may look unchanged, and even though your prayers may feel unanswered, there is movement happening in the invisible world that is already shaping the visible outcome of your life. And the reason you are still standing after everything that tried to break you is because God stepped into battles you never even knew existed, and the reason you still have peace in moments that should have destroyed you is because God blocked attacks you never saw coming, and the reason certain doors closed before you walked through them is because God protected you from situations that would have damaged Your purpose and the reason some people disappeared from your life without explanation is because God removed them before they could interfere with where He is taking you, and sometimes it hurts when things change suddenly, and sometimes it feels confusing when people leave unexpectedly, and sometimes it feels unfair when opportunities disappear without warning. But what you cannot see yet is that every shift that happened around you was connected to a battle God was already fighting for you long before you realized something was wrong, because heaven does not react late and God does not move slowly when your purpose is involved, and even when it looks like nothing is happening, something powerful is already taking place behind the scenes of your life. And the truth is, there are moments when God protects you quietly, because if He showed you everything He was blocking, you would realize how close certain attacks came to reaching you and how many plans were stopped before they could even begin, and how many dangers were removed before they ever became visible. And right now there are things that could have happened but did not happen because God stepped into the fight, and there are people who could have harmed your future but suddenly lost access to your life because God stepped into the fight, and there are situations that could have destroyed your peace but somehow never reached you because God stepped into the fight, and you may not have noticed it at the time, and you may not have understood it when it happened, but one day you will look back at this season and realize that heaven was working harder for you than you ever imagined, and that the silence you experienced was never absence, and that the delay you felt was never denial, and that the confusion you faced was never abandonment, because while you were trying to survive what you could see, God was already defeating what you could not see. And the truth is, there are spiritual battles that never show themselves on the surface, and there are victories that happen long before you recognize them, and there are miracles that begin quietly before they appear publicly. And right now, even if your situation has not changed yet, even if your breakthrough has not arrived yet, even if your answers have not appeared yet, God is still fighting a battle you cannot see, and He is still protecting a future you cannot fully understand yet, and He is still preparing a victory that is closer than you think, even if it feels far away today. And sometimes the strongest evidence that God is fighting for you is the simple fact that you are still here and still moving and still believing, even after everything that tried to stop you, because the enemy expected you to quit, and the enemy expected you to lose hope, and the enemy expected you to walk away from your purpose. But instead you are still standing and still searching and still trusting, even when things became difficult, which is proof that there is a battle happening behind the scenes that you were never meant to fight alone. And even right now, God is still moving in ways you cannot measure, and still protecting outcomes you cannot predict, and still opening doors that are not visible yet. And the story of your life is still being written by hands stronger than any opposition that tried to stop you. And the reason this season feels different is because something is shifting in the invisible world before it shifts in the visible world. And the reason you feel pressure right now is because pressure often appears before promotion, and the reason you feel resistance right now is because resistance often appears before breakthrough, and the reason you feel uncertainty right now is because uncertainty often appears before clarity, and the reason you feel separation right now is because separation often appears before elevation. And what looks like a difficult season is actually evidence that something important is being protected, and something powerful is being prepared, and something significant is already on its way toward your life, even if you cannot see it yet, because God is fighting a battle you cannot see, and He has not stopped fighting, and He will not stop fighting until the victory connected to your future becomes visible in your reality. There are moments in your life when everything feels silent, when prayers seem unanswered, when doors stay closed longer than expected, when people misunderstand you, when opportunities disappear without explanation, and when your heart quietly begins to wonder if heaven is still listening. But what you cannot see right now is that God is already moving in places your eyes have never reached and fighting battles your mind has never even imagined, because the greatest victories God prepares for His children almost always begin in invisible places long before they appear in visible reality, and while you are standing in confusion wondering why things slowed down, heaven is already accelerating something behind the scenes that will change your story forever. The reason the enemy tries so hard to make you feel stuck is because he knows movement is already happening in the spiritual realm that he cannot stop, and that movement is working in your favor even when your circumstances look unchanged, because God never waits until you understand everything before He starts protecting you. He begins protecting you the moment He decides your future is too important to leave unguarded. And that protection sometimes looks like delay, sometimes looks like separation, sometimes looks like silence, and sometimes even looks like disappointment, but every one of those moments is actually evidence that something powerful is happening behind the curtain of your life. God is fighting conversations about you that you never heard, closing doors that would have led to regret, redirecting people who were never meant to stay in your destiny, and removing obstacles before they ever reached your path. And the reason you cannot see this battle is because if you saw everything God saved you from, your heart would realize just how close you came to situations that could have broken your peace permanently. Sometimes the silence you are experiencing is not abandonment but protection, because God does His deepest work in quiet seasons where faith becomes stronger than feelings and trust becomes stronger than fear, and those quiet seasons are the very places where your spiritual strength is being prepared for something bigger than what you originally asked for. There are blessings that require preparation before arrival, and there are victories that require positioning before manifestation, which means the waiting season you are in right now is not empty time but preparation time, and preparation is one of the strongest signs that God is already fighting for your future even before your breakthrough appears. You may not realize it yet, but every unexpected delay you experienced recently was actually a hidden defense system designed by heaven itself to protect your destiny from moving too fast into the wrong direction, because God never allows His children to walk unprotected into battles they are not equipped to win, and instead He quietly rearranges circumstances so that when the moment finally arrives, you step forward with strength instead of confusion and confidence instead of fear. Right now something is shifting around you that you cannot measure with logic or explain with evidence, because spiritual battles are never fought with visible weapons but with divine authority that moves in ways human understanding cannot fully explain, and while the enemy works through distraction and doubt, God works through timing and purpose, and His timing always carries power that changes situations suddenly when the right moment arrives. There are nights when you thought nothing was happening, but heaven was already moving on your behalf. There were mornings when you woke up feeling uncertain about your direction, but God had already arranged protection ahead of your steps. And there were moments when people walked away from your life without warning, but what you did not realize then was that God was removing confusion so clarity could enter your future. The battle you cannot see is not only about protection from what could harm you but also about positioning you for what is meant to bless you, because God never removes something from your life unless He is making room for something better to arrive at the right time. And what feels like loss today often becomes confirmation tomorrow that God was guiding your life towards something greater than what you expected. Even when your situation looks unchanged, your story is already changing behind the scenes, because God does not wait for visible progress before He begins working on invisible transformation, and invisible transformation always becomes visible testimony at the perfect moment designed by heaven. The enemy wants you to believe nothing is moving so that your faith becomes weaker, but the truth is that movement in the spiritual realm begins long before movement in the physical world becomes visible, and the strongest breakthroughs always start in places where human eyes cannot see but faith can still believe. This is why your faith right now is more powerful than your circumstances, because faith connects you to what God is already doing even when your environment has not yet caught up with His plan, and the moment your faith stays strong during uncertainty is the same moment heaven continues strengthening the victory that is already being prepared for your life. God is fighting to protect your peace, fighting to secure your future, fighting to restore what confusion tried to take from you, and fighting to position you exactly where your purpose will begin to unfold in ways that surprise even the people who doubted your journey. And one day very soon you will look back at this season that once felt confusing and realize it was actually the turning point where God was quietly fighting battles you never knew existed so that blessings you never imagined could safely arrive in your life at exactly the right time. There are moments in your life when everything around you feels silent, but something deep inside your spirit keeps whispering that God is still working even when you cannot see the evidence yet, because faith was never designed to depend on what your eyes confirm but on what your soul knows is already being arranged in heaven before it appears on earth. And right now, even if your situation looks unchanged, even if your prayers seem unanswered, even if people around you are moving forward faster than you, and even if doors continue closing without explanation, God is not ignoring you. He is protecting you from battles you were never meant to fight and preparing victories that are larger than anything you expected, because sometimes the greatest miracles begin in seasons where nothing seems to be happening at all, and what looks like delay in your life is actually divine timing positioning people, circumstances, and unseen opportunities exactly where they need to be, so when your moment arrives, it will not just be good, it will be undeniable, unstoppable, and impossible for anyone to take credit for except God Himself. And the reason this season has felt heavier than others is because the battle happening around you is not physical, it is spiritual, it is unseen, and it is personal. And while you were wondering why certain people suddenly walked away, why certain plans suddenly failed, why certain opportunities suddenly disappeared, heaven was already responding to prayers you prayed months ago, protecting your future from connections that would have distracted your destiny and situations that would have delayed your purpose, because God never removes something without already preparing something greater. And even when removal hurts, even when separation feels confusing, even when silence feels like abandonment, God is actually making space for something that could never enter your life unless the old season first came to an end. And the truth is, some battles are being fought right now that you will never even know existed, because God is handling them before they ever reach your doorstep, which means the peace you feel sometimes in the middle of uncertainty is not random, it is protection, and the strength you still have after everything you have faced is not coincidence, it is evidence that heaven is standing between you and what tried to destroy you. And maybe you thought you survived because you were strong, maybe you thought you kept moving because you were determined, maybe you thought you stayed hopeful because you refused to quit, but the reality is God was carrying you through moments you did not even realize you were being attacked. And the reason your story did not end the way the enemy expected is because God stepped into battles you never saw and fought wars you never knew were happening. And right now, even though answers are still forming, even though clarity has not fully arrived, even though the path ahead still looks uncertain, God is already arranging Restoration opportunities favor connections, healing, and breakthrough behind the scenes because heaven never reacts late. Heaven moves exactly on time, and the same God who protected you in your weakest season is still protecting you in your waiting season, and the same God who closed doors that confused you is the same God preparing doors that will confirm everything you have been believing for. And this is why you cannot measure your progress by what you see today, because some victories begin invisibly long before they appear physically, and some breakthroughs start quietly long before they become publicly undeniable. And what God is doing for you right now is not temporary help, it is permanent positioning, because He is not just solving your current problems, He is preparing your future stability, your future influence, your future testimony, and your future impact in ways that will not only change your life but inspire everyone who watches what God does next in your story. And the reason this battle has taken longer than you expected is because the blessing attached to it is larger than anything you have ever carried before, and God never releases something heavy into your life until He strengthens your spirit enough to hold it without losing yourself in the process. And even though you cannot see the full picture yet, even though you cannot understand every delay yet, even though you cannot explain why certain things happened the way they did, one day you will look back at this exact season and realize God was never absent. He was fighting for you, protecting you, preparing you, and positioning you the entire time. And what felt like silence was actually strategy. What felt like confusion was actually direction. What felt like loss was actually protection. And what felt like waiting was actually preparation for the moment your life begins to change faster than you ever imagined. Because when God finishes fighting the battle you cannot see, the victory He reveals will be impossible to ignore and impossible to stop, and that moment is closer to you right now than you think. There is something powerful happening in your life right now that you cannot fully recognize yet, because some of the most important movements of God do not begin with noise, they begin with quiet shifts in places your eyes cannot reach. And while you have been wondering why things suddenly slowed down, why certain answers did not arrive when you expected them, and why the path ahead has not opened the way you imagined it would, the truth is heaven has been working with precision around your future, removing obstacles you never knew were waiting ahead, redirecting paths that would have taken you in the wrong direction, and strengthening parts of your spirit that needed to grow before the next chapter of your life could safely begin. Because God never allows you to step into a larger calling until He prepares your heart to carry it without fear, confusion, or distraction. And right now what feels like delay is actually alignment, because there are moments when God must rearrange situations beyond your control before He reveals what He has already planned for you long before you even started praying about it. And this is why some of your prayers seemed unanswered, not because they were ignored, but because they were being answered in a way you could not yet understand. And sometimes the greatest evidence that God is fighting for you is not what appears in front of you, but what quietly disappears from your life without explanation, because protection often looks like loss before it reveals itself as blessing. And the reason certain doors closed without warning, certain conversations ended without closure, and certain relationships faded without reason is because God was clearing space for something stronger, more stable, and more aligned with your purpose than anything you were holding on to before. And even though it hurt, even though it confused you, even though it made you question whether you were moving forward or falling behind, heaven was never allowing your story to collapse. It was strengthening your foundation so what comes next in your life cannot be shaken by circumstances, people, or fear. And the truth is, there are victories already forming around you right now that have your name attached to them, opportunities already moving closer to you that you did not expect, favor already being arranged in conversations you have not yet heard, and answers already traveling toward you from places you did not know were connected to your future. Because when God fights battles on your behalf, He does not only protect you from what is behind you, He prepares what is ahead of you. And the reason your spirit has not given up even in moments when everything around you felt uncertain is because God placed a quiet strength inside you that refuses to surrender even when logic says you should stop believing. And that strength is not coming from your situation, it is coming from heaven, reminding you that your story is still being written and your breakthrough is still being prepared, and your restoration is still being arranged in ways that will make sense later, even if they feel confusing right now. Because sometimes the longest battles create the strongest testimonies, and sometimes the quietest seasons produce the loudest miracles. And what you are experiencing right now is not a season of being forgotten, it is a season of being positioned, because God is building something in your life that cannot be rushed, copied, or interrupted by anyone who does not belong. In the future, He is preparing for you. And even though the waiting has stretched longer than expected, even though the answers have taken more time than you hoped, even though the road has felt uncertain, God has never stepped away from your situation. He has been standing in places you could not stand, fighting battles you could not fight, and protecting doors you were never meant to open on your own. And the same God who guided you through moments that once felt impossible is still guiding you now, even if the direction feels unclear, because faith was never meant to depend on visibility, it was meant to depend on trust. And right now, trust is what is carrying you forward even when you cannot see where the road is leading. And the reason this season has required so much patience from you is because what God is preparing is not temporary relief, it is lasting transformation. And when that transformation begins to appear in your life, it will not only change your circumstances, it will change the way you see yourself, the way others see your story, and the way your future unfolds from this point forward. Because the battle you cannot see is already shifting in your favor, and what God is about to reveal next in your life will make every moment of waiting, every unanswered question, and every silent prayer suddenly make sense in a way you never expected. And that moment of understanding is moving closer to you right now, even if you cannot yet see it. There is something powerful happening in your life right now that you cannot explain, something shifting behind closed spiritual doors while you are still standing in the middle of unanswered prayers, silent mornings, delayed opportunities, and confusing seasons. Because what feels like inactivity to you is actually strategy in heaven, what feels like rejection is protection in disguise. And what feels like loss is often the exact moment God begins removing the invisible enemies that were assigned to stop your future before it even arrived. And the truth is, if God showed you everything He is blocking on your behalf right now, you would fall to your knees in gratitude instead of standing in frustration wondering why things are not moving faster. You keep asking why certain people suddenly changed toward you, why conversations stopped without explanation, why doors closed that once felt secure, why plans you trusted completely began to fall apart at the last moment. But what you could not see was that those connections carried hidden assignments against your destiny. And before your blessing could arrive, God had to quietly remove what looked normal but was never meant to stay. Because sometimes the greatest battles God fights for you are not against visible enemies but against invisible alignments that were never designed to walk with you into your next level. There are nights when you think nothing is happening, when your prayers feel like they disappear into silence, when your strength feels smaller than your situation, when your confidence begins to shake because results are not showing yet, but those are the exact nights heaven is working the hardest on your behalf, because spiritual battles are not loud, they are not public, they are not always dramatic. They happen in silence where your faith is being strengthened while your path is being cleared at the same time, and the reason you are still standing after everything you have faced is because God has already fought battles you never even knew existed. The enemy thought confusion would stop you, but God turned confusion into preparation. The enemy thought delay would weaken you, but God turned delay into positioning. The enemy thought pressure would break you, but God turned pressure into strength, and what you called struggle was actually construction because God was building a version of you strong enough to carry what is coming next without collapsing under the weight of the blessing. There were moments you almost gave up completely, moments when you questioned your direction, moments when you wondered if you misunderstood what God promised you, moments when you felt like everyone else was moving forward while your life stayed stuck in one place. But what you did not realize was that heaven never stopped moving even when your situation looked still, because God does not measure progress the way people do. He measures preparation, alignment, timing, and protection, and right. Now all four are working together in your favor even if you cannot see it yet. God is not only fighting for what you are praying about, He is fighting for what you have not even imagined yet. He is protecting opportunities you have not discovered yet, relationships you have not met yet, doors you have not reached yet, and victories you have not expected yet, because when God prepares your future He prepares it completely, not partially, not temporarily, but intentionally and permanently in ways that cannot be reversed by the plans of the enemy. There is a reason certain attacks suddenly increased in your life before your breakthrough began to approach. There is a reason discouragement tried to speak louder right before your faith started growing stronger. There is a reason distractions appeared right when clarity was getting closer, because the enemy always tries to create noise before God releases movement. But what the enemy does not understand is that every attack he sends only confirms that something valuable is already being prepared ahead of you. Even now, while you are listening to this message, there are battles being handled that you never prayed about specifically because God saw them before they reached you. There are traps being removed before your steps arrive there. There are words being silenced before they damage your name. There are obstacles being shifted before they block your progress. And this is why you must not interpret silence as absence, because silence is often the sound of God working in places your eyes cannot reach. Yet, you are not behind in life, you are not forgotten, you are not overlooked, and you are not walking alone through this season, because every delay that protected you, every closed door that redirected you, every separation that strengthened you, and every struggle that matured you was part of a hidden battle God has already been fighting for your future. And the same God who carried you through what you survived yesterday is still standing in front of you today, clearing the path for what you are about to step into next.